Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Business of Sports.
The business of sports can be intimidating or hard for a startup to break into.
We really appreciate when our owners are actually there, with us through the journey.
Teams, ours especially, have been very intentional to diversify at all levels of the company.
I think we're in the golden years for the NFL and college football.
Our demographic reach has continued to expand.
This is going to be really unlocking the streaming platform for sports fans.
Sports valuations are rising. We'll see when they peak.
You don't have to be the best in your sport to make a whole ton of money.
Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio. Hello, this is the Bloomberg Business of Sports show where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr.
And I'm Damian Sassower.
Scarlett will be back next week. Coming up on the show, we talk a lot of hockey with the NHL's Chief Business and Revenue Officer and Senior Executive Vice President, Keith Wachtel.
We put almost 23 million people into our buildings this past year. It's a record for us attendance. I mean, our sport, yes, it is the most passionate. We have diehard fans, and it's always been a great live sport. And you do see these packed arenas.
Plus, we get ready for this year's Kentucky Derby with the CEO of Churchill Downs, Bill Carstanjen.
The central point of the track when the horses aren't on it is the paddock. That's where the horses are paraded before the race for everybody to look at. And that's the heartbeat. That's what everybody in the track looks at and sees and thinks as the center point, the heartbeat of the facility.
All that is on the way on the Bloomberg Business of Sports. That was bad. But first, we've been talking a lot lately about big stadium moves and the big money involved. Here now to talk to us a little about firms investing in the live entertainment space and other big money investments in sports, we welcome Bobby Sharma. He is the founder and managing partner of Bluestone Equity Partners. Bobby, welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I said to myself, as I'm looking at the business world here, and you have a vast amount of knowledge about it, where is it right now that you think the investment focus of Bluestone should be when it comes to this landscape?
Well, we're differentiated, I think, from a lot of the other capital that's being deployed in the space in that not only are we well capitalized, but we're employing a very specific focused strategy, which is to say we're growth equity investors. So I get that question a lot. Like, where do you see the opportunities? Well, employing that kind of a strategy, we basically look for good businesses that we can help make great. So what I mean by that is our starting point is cash flow positive. Second hurdle is, can we add value to it? And the third is, can we underwrite it to a 30% IRR and a 3 times MOIC return? So we've had the good fortune of enjoying tremendous deal flow, both in terms of volume. At this point, I think we're over 700 deals reviewed, and quality is 75% proprietary, by which I mean off-market, non-competitive bidding processes. So we've been able to extract 3 amazing deals out of that and 3 amazing companies, and we're close to several more. But I think maybe the short answer to your question is everywhere. I think the entire ecosystem of sport is vibrant, it's dynamic, it's also still very closely held, a lot of it, and it's still and constant. I say still, it's like it's constantly shifting. Like the primary value drivers are shifting, the culture underlying the businesses shift. Obviously, the technologies continue to evolve. And sometimes revenue streams are cut off by such things. Sometimes they're created by such things. So all in all, we consider ourselves asset type agnostic and sector agnostic. We just look for good companies with great leaders that we can work together with as partners and grow.
So Bobby, I got to ask you this, and for our audience, Bobby used to be general counsel of the NBA Developmental League. He's a former exec at IMG. He's been involved in the game for many, many years. And, I'm looking at your portfolio of companies, and it seems to be, a lot of it is, content, the experience. It's a lot of technology. And, I like the NBA. I've been watching the NBA playoffs, and I'm watching some of these calls that the officials are making, and I'm wondering to myself, When is technology going to help these officials make the calls they need to make at the end of games? I mean, I'm a Knicks fan, and I mean, we're not crying here, Bobby, but I'm just kidding. Just talk to us a little bit about the role of technology in sports today, the type of investments that you're seeing, the type of pipeline that's out there.
Yeah, I think technology is interlaced in all three of the investments that we've made so far. But to your specific point as a fan, there are technologies already that we start now taking for granted as just normal course of business. But the Hawkeye technology that's used in tennis, we don't rely on human beings for tennis calls generally in competitive tennis. And I'm on the board of the USTA, so that one's especially near and dear to me. But also video review, instant replay review. Major League Baseball, as you may know, is employing a technology called balls and strikes. So I think AI-driven versions of these replay technologies and line judging calls. I think we're going to have more and more an evolution of sports and rules and judgment calling to get to a place where it's just more accurate, right? I think that's what the Hawkeye does for tennis. Basketball is just the hardest sport, right? So another sport near and dear to me. I went to Duke for undergrad and law school, and Park is the basketball team. And as you referenced, I worked at the NBA for David Stern and Adam Silver for a decade. And it's just the hardest, fastest sport with the most rules to be applied at the same time. So in some ways, I think AI is probably going to help drive more accuracy in that sense. But the NBA does a tremendous job training their officials.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's not bash the NBA. I mean, those officials did the best they could in that type of an environment. I mean, in MSG, could forget about it. Anyway. But I guess
if you knew, sorry to interrupt. If you knew the degree of training that the referees at the NBA undergo, after every game, every play is reviewed by the officiating crew to learn what went right, what went wrong. So, but absolutely right. There's always that human element, and baseball is probably my first love and maybe still biggest love in terms of sports. And I kind of I like the human element. I like that there's decision making and arguing. And,
I wouldn't say that to Aaron Boone right
now. well,
reflective of life, but.
Well, let me ask, Bobby, let me ask you this. I look at PMY Group, RWS, a lot of what, I'm seeing here, Videoverse, smart video editing, graphic design, art direction, basically data analysis, right? And so, if you look at PMY Group, right, a lot of it is surveillance and Wi-Fi and cyber within, the event venue, obviously. But my thinking here is, how involved are you with making sure that the data collection, right, the images you're taking of strike zones, for example, or a tennis court, for example, are finding its way to an official in short order so that they can actually make the right call and not really impact the game negatively, right? Is that technology out there? Are you seeing anything on that front at all?
I think there are technologies like that under development. I mentioned several that are post-development being utilized on a consistent basis. But yeah, in reference to my portfolio companies, you said, so PMY is the market leader in terms of technology solutions for major events and venues. So not so much
the strike zone
referee decision making, but even more interestingly, they're very illustrative of technology throughout the ecosystem. So they do everything from analyzing foot traffic for commercial purposes, security purposes, just human inflow, outflow purposes. They do everything from the video boards to the lighting, making them all connect and talk and smart for everything from the U.S. Open and Wimbledon, the Australian Open, to every NBA arena, every NFL stadium, the Glastonbury Festival, the LA Olympics, Paris Olympics, and even bigger addressable market opportunities like LAX airport, JFK airport's refurbishment. So technology is kind of in everything in our lives. And with respect to sports, it's especially valuable both as a commercial matter to help improve the business, obviously always as a security matter, but and also as a sporting matter. Like on the sporting side, actually PMY does have a sporting data platform that's been utilized by some of the most successful European football clubs, for example, that helps them track, understand the players, their data that they're constantly creating with their play on the field, and how to make better decision making in terms of personnel decisions. But yeah, I'll go back to my romantic answer in terms of I kind of like a little bit of human decision making when it comes to the officiating part of things.
Thank God, demand for live events is coming back strong because COVID just wiped everything out.
Totally.
I mean, it's Bobby, if you can expand more on this, I still don't think people understand what COVID did to the sports industry in general, especially for live events.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was an existential moment where those of us who've focused our careers in this industry were concerned that there wouldn't be an industry of sport. And I think, my old colleagues at the NBA are often market leading in a lot of things. And sometimes when things are hardest, I think their decision to pause the season when they did is the thing that made COVID real for everybody, right? Inside and outside of sport. And then they're figuring out a playbook with the bubble as they did. The show must go on in order to provide a safe environment in order to deliver that media product, both to meet their obligations there, but then also to satisfy their consumers when we were all stuck at home, I think was pretty amazing. But COVID definitely shifted a lot of things in our lives for permanently. But I think if anything, what it showed is the resilience of sports media and entertainment as an investable asset class, and that's what gave rise to my private equity fund and firm and Bluestone Equity Partners. As you may know, we closed $300 million a year ago, a little more than a year ago, and what gave rise to that, and we're entirely institutional backed, so pension fund capital,
right,
and that is generally conservative, but is looking for exposure into this space. Why? High growth for generations at this point, and also resilience through not just COVID, but the dot-com bubble, the 2007-8 financial crisis. One of the few asset classes that have shown a resilience and consistent growth through all that has been sports media and entertainment. In a world of time shifting, video on demand, Netflix watching, the live sports content is still king, and it's really kind of underpinning those valuations that you see in the teams and the major sports properties that drive viewership at scale.
Bobby Sharma, founder and managing partner of Bluestone Equity Partners. You are gold, sir. Thank you so much for joining us on the Bloomberg Business of Sports. We really do appreciate it. Up next on the show, we turn to big money in hockey. You're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports show, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr, along with Damian Sassower. Scarlett will be back next week. The NHL playoffs are in full swing.
Here's Kopitar with an opportunity, and he scores! The Kings captain, Anze Kopitar, the overtime hero for LA, and the Kings steal game 2, 5-4 final score.
Here now to take us through the state of the sport as we make our way toward crowning a new champion, plus some of the big money headlines, we welcome Keith Wachtel. He's Chief Business and Revenue Officer and Senior Executive Vice President of Global Partnerships for the NHL. Keith, welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Thank you, and I like the enthusiasm.
Well, see, I have followed hockey for many years. I'm a native Detroit kid, Detroit Red Wings, and I could also get Channel 9 and also see all of the Toronto Maple Leafs games and the Canadiens. I could see it all, and hockey goes back to way back to 1917. It wasn't even real ice back then.
Not real ice.
It was just, you took sand and then you made it ice. That's how old this game is. Can you take us now to where we've been, to what the game is like right now?
I mean, it certainly has changed. I think it's changed dramatically even from, the past decade. I think it all starts with the game on the ice. the level of skill that you see night in, night out from these players all over the world, to me is, proves these are the best athletes in all of sport. Every night they defy logic. They really do. How they're able to skate as fast as they do, shoot, and the speed of the game has just never been better. And the results on the ice, obviously, and the success that we've had and kind of that change to the game really has led to increased fandom as well as growth in the business. So we couldn't be more thrilled with the young group of players that we have. And still the superstars like Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin that are still playing at such a high level. So when you look at the sport and where it is today, I think it is in such a great place and only improving. And that is a testament to, like you just said, over 100 years, the game continuing to evolve and really be in a great place.
Keith, I really want to ask you about the Turner media deal that's set to expire in 2027-28. But before I do, what is your approach to the new elevated green on 15 at Tamarack Country Club? Because, or better yet, what are your thoughts to the two traps in the middle of number 5? Because, by the way, Michael Barr, Keith and I belong to the same club, as you can probably imagine. We have some new things going on.
You
ought
to be called for icing on that question.
No, Keith, I'm just kidding. But this is my question for you, Keith. You're in NHL Original Productions, NHL Studios. You're in charge of all that original programming. Talk to us about, since Miracle, right? Miracle on Ice, 1980, right? Kurt Russell. What stories in hockey haven't yet been told on the big screen?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I certainly would love to take maybe a golf podcast. You and I could do something separate about the elevated and the greens rolling at about an 11. 14. But the content, if you think about, we look at the game itself every night as incredible content, right? That's the story night in, night out, and all of the partners that we have. You mentioned Turner, but it's Turner, it's ESPN, right. It's Rogers in Canada. We have global distribution of our game in over 140 countries. Streaming platforms with ESPN Plus and Max. So you look at the totality and the amount of content that we put out on a day-to-day basis. Steve Mayer, who is the head of content, does a tremendous job trying to find those unique stories. So this year he put a documentary out on Alexander Daig. Just last week we had a documentary called Saving Sakic, the story of Joe Sakic, the untold story of when the Rangers put a offer sheet to him that had never been done before and never certainly been matched. And that's what the Colorado Avalanche did, went on to win another Stanley Cup. Those are the types of stories that we think are really important, especially for our avid hockey fans. But one of the areas that we're really focused on in the world of content, and maybe you saw what we did with ESPN and Disney and Big City Greens, what we just did with Multiverses and Turner. We did application with the Chicago Blackhawks in reaching a new audience of youth, these animated games where we use our puck and player technology to basically have an alternative broadcast. That is live. That is exactly the same as what you would see on our more traditional linear channels. And we're putting that in a completely new way to reach a new audience. And that's really what's important to us. And if you think about what's really evolved, not just the game on the ice, but technology in all sports, it's become a focal point for all of the leagues, for all of the properties and the broadcasters and the teams. And that's really what we're trying to do, Damian. We're trying to look at the game and how do we get it in this great game that we all love, we just talked about, into more households, more engagement. So content is one of the premier strategies for us in order for us to be able to do that and grow the game.
We're talking about this. 15 of the markets in the NHL, they're packed in the arenas. You can't get a seat, my goodness. And that shows you about the diehard hockey fans.
Yeah, it's certainly would argue it is the best live sport. We put almost 23 million people into our buildings this past year. It's a record for us attendance. our sport, yes, it is the most passionate. We have diehard fans, and it's always been a great live sport. And you do see these packed arenas, and it's not just 15. I would argue that all 32, certainly throughout the year, will see their fair share of sellouts, if not every game. What we're trying to do is figure out how to make that in-arena experience even better for the fans, because we want them to keep going. At the same time, how do we make it better for those that can't get to a game, that can't buy that ticket, and whether they're watching it at home or elsewhere? And that's really important. But from an attendance standpoint, and you look at the playoffs starting on Saturday, incredible numbers coming out of the weekend, packed houses, the whiteout in Winnipeg. I mean, you name it.
Yep.
What's happening, with the 16 teams that are currently in it. It is must-watch TV every single night. The storylines are incredible. And we do think this is the best 2 months in sports is the NHL playoffs.
Keith, I have to ask you this one last question quickly. Sports gambling. And, I look at odds to win the Stanley Cup this year, and I don't think I've ever seen 7 teams. I mean, basically, Vegas has no idea who's winning the Stanley Cup this year. And I'm not going to ask what your opinion is of that, but just the impact of sports betting, of sports gambling on the NHL. Talk to us briefly about that.
I think the unpredictability of our sport night after night, and certainly in the playoffs, you just got to get in, right? So we love the competitive balance that we have in the league. And as you look at sports betting, I mean, it's here. It's part of the fabric of, certainly the global culture. And what it does is it provides another bit of a rooting interest, right? So, there is so many opportunities now to engage in a sport. Sports betting is one of them. Certainly where it's legalized. And, we like the engagement factor. Really, as you start looking into, prop bets and things like that with our puck and player tracking, you can now see how fast everyone's skating, how hard they're shooting. And what sports betting really does, in our opinion, is engage fans a little bit deeper. It's very important that they bet responsibly, but the engagement is really, really important. And I think that's helped, quite frankly, all the sports from an engagement standpoint. And again, as long as it's done responsibly, we are very supportive of, again, betting in legalized states.
Man, what a year it's been. What a playoffs we can expect to have here. Keith Wachtel, Chief Business Officer and Senior Executive Vice President for the NHL, also Tamarack Country Club Sandbagger. Thank you for joining us on the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to taking some of your money in the coming months.
From battles on the ice to battles in the ring on the latest episode of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly. They speak with Mark Shapiro, Endeavor and TKO president and COO. In a wide-ranging conversation, they talk about the real story behind the landmark merger of UFC and WWE. Let's take a listen to a portion of that conversation.
One of the things that's really interesting about when you combine UFC and WWE, by the way, I was a massive WWE fan with, going back to the Hulk Hogan days and all Macho Camacho, Randy Man, all that. My question to you is over 1 billion fans, right, combined. I actually think you guys in the early days of how do you serve that consumer 24/7, 365, there's so much upside.
That's right. So we know we're still building a lot here domestically, but yet there's a lot of international growth for the WWE. And using IMG and the Endeavor platform as the underpinning to get it out there, to make deals that get you into new territories all the time in good programming windows on the platforms that matter, absolutely key to that growth.
Could you ever see integrating both into one mega event?
I see it potentially as a one event, potentially. Although they're two different audiences. WWE is middle America. It's, the show's coming to town, a lot of kids, and it's a slice of Americana. The UFC has an international flavor, right? It's college age and up. It's a big betting sport also. It's gender neutral because we have a lot of female champions. Ronda Rousey is one of the biggest stars ever to come out of the UFC. And ultimately, Brazil, South America, I mean, it's a monster. Canada, Australia, these are good places to be. So I think that there's an opportunity to bring them out together. There's an opportunity to event, and maybe there's an opportunity to launch a channel with them together.
The Yankees model, yes,
network, exactly.
Right.
That is Endeavor and TKO President and COO Mark Shapiro on the latest edition of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly. Listen to the full episode now on your favorite podcast platform. Plus, watch new episodes of The Deal every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Television, or stream it on Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Originals. Coming up next, it's almost Derby time. We'll get you set for this year's Kentucky Derby next with the CEO of Churchill Downs, Bill Carstanjen. This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports show where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr. Scarlett and Damian will be back next week, but here to help me with our next conversation is friend of the show, Vanessa Perdomo. She covers sports for Bloomberg Originals. A partner, the fans just love it. In fact, for Vanessa Perdomo, it's gone up another 10% of all the fans that love listening to her. Vanessa, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for the warm welcome, Michael. And I'm so happy I can join for all my fans out there.
Well, Vanessa, we're getting ready for Derby Day. The Kentucky Derby is back next weekend, and it's a big anniversary. Here to help us preview the run, plus take us behind the scenes, is Bill Carstanjen, Chief Executive Officer at Churchill Downs. Bill, welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Michael, thanks for having me. It's great to be back. Really, really pleased to be here. Excited to be here.
We were talking about this off air, so now I got to bring it up again. My wife was, and now she's not a gambler, but she had to make a bet, and this happened a couple of years ago. I believe Strike Rich, won the Kentucky Derby.
Rich Strike.
Rich Strike, yeah. It was, 40-1 or whatever the heck it was, or something like that, whatever. She actually put $100 down on this horse to win. And my first thought was like, well, what in the hell would you do that for? Well, she won $4,000. As this is the day where people, when the Run for the Roses happens, that they have to be careful because that usually does not happen.
No, and living in Kentucky like I do, I'm surrounded by people that speak with great authority about what's going to happen. And you believe it the first time you hear it, then you talk to somebody else and they tell you something completely different. Everybody's got a theory, but there are 20 horses in the race and anything can happen. And Rich Strike a couple of years ago, the horse your wife won on, that was one of the biggest upsets of all time. But it seems like every 5 to 10 years we have a similar sort of wild finish where there are lots of folks like your wife saying, I just won all this money unexpectedly. And then there are a lot of people from Kentucky going, I can't believe that horse. I never heard of it. And I lost all my money. So the good news about horse racing and betting on horse racing is somebody's always happy at the end of it.
Well, Bill, talking about the betting on racing, we got to talk about the current state of, mobile betting. How has that, the impact of it and the growth of mobile betting really taken off for the Derby?
Well, the Derby, it's been around for 150 years. So this will be the 150th Derby. It's the longest continually held sporting event in the United States. And interestingly, because of some flukes in the law and sort of the long history of the sport, there was online wagering on horse racing since the advent of the internet. So really the late 90s, early 2000s, when the internet really took off, there's been online wagering on horse racing. As other sports became legalized over the last 4 or 5 years, there were two ways to look at it. One is horse racing would no longer have its monopoly. It would no longer be the only product you could wager on. But on the other hand, And this is the way we chose to look at it. On the other hand, there were all these people who were now going to have online wagering accounts because they wanted to bet on the Giants, or they wanted to bet on the Rangers, or they wanted to bet on the Knicks. And now it was easier to reach those people. So our distribution got a lot broader. And so how that's translated for the Kentucky Derby is we've been setting our wagering record every single year. We set a new wagering record, and the availability of the Derby online has been a big contributor to that.
Can you give us some numbers on how it's grown over the last couple of years now? Are you reaching out to people who've never bet before? Like you said, like you're reaching out to people who bet on football, and now you're trying to get them to bet on the Derby. So how does that work for you, and how has it grown numerically? So
generally across the country, there's horse racing every day. So there are hardcore horse racing players, and they're out there betting every day. But when you get to an event like the Derby, there's all this casual fan money that comes in. So it's a much, much bigger day. And it's our chance, really our best chance every year to reach new people to introduce them to horse racing. I remember when we did $100 million of wagering. And last year, I think on the Derby race itself, I think we did 225, 350 for the whole week. Huge wagering pools. They're getting bigger every year. There's an international component, but it's really what's driving it is better distribution to reach the American casual player who isn't an expert in horse racing, but like Michael's wife, likes the name of a horse or has a theory or a lucky number. And that's as good a way of picking a horse as any.
I mean, right, because you never know who it's going to be. And quite often, it's never the people that the experts say it's going to be, right?
If I could just say on that, there's a series of qualifying races to get your horse in the Kentucky Derby. And your horse can only run in the Kentucky Derby one time. Whatever year a horse is born in, it's always given the birthday date of January 1st. So the Kentucky Derby, your horse has to be 3 years old. So it can only run in at one time. And there's a series of qualifying events in order to qualify. But what happens on Derby Day is you have anywhere from 150 to 170,000 people in the stands cheering, and you have 20 horses in the gate, and it's chaotic. So you can get all kinds of interesting results in those circumstances. That's why it's such a fun race to bet on.
That's really interesting. Well, let's talk, a little bit more about that, the casualness of it and the entire event itself, 150 years. How do you stay relevant over 150 years? And how has the Derby been able to innovate for the ever-changing landscape of sports and fandom in the U.S.?
I don't think we would have survived all these years if we didn't ask ourselves that question. I think it's a really important question. When you've been around for 150 years, if you're not changing constantly, you become irrelevant. So we are constantly investing in our facility. We are constantly going all over the world to see from a sports venue and from an entertainment venue perspective, what works the best, what's going to excite people, what's going to give them that unique bucket list event. And we try to capitalize on that. So we're very aggressive about investing and continuously changing our venue. And I would also say, different from any other sporting event I've ever seen in the United States or the world, we're a female-driven fan base. Yes, there are plenty of men that are there, but the Derby's really sort of like the Oscars for the everyday person. Everybody wears clothes that they wouldn't wear at any other event during the year. For women, it's hats, it's colorful outfits, and I think it's a chance for everybody to be the star of the show. So, and that is a female energy that I think drives the whole event, and it's unique in America. And I think that's something that we noticed over time. I don't know that originally the founders of the Kentucky Derby were trying to create that, but that's become the cultural event that it is. And that's something that our team works very, very hard on trying to capitalize on, because we do think it's one of those things that makes us a unique bucket list event for people.
It is an event, which brings me to the next point. Thank goodness, and I know it's an old story, and I'm so glad now, we were talking about it earlier, about live events coming back strong, especially after COVID, because I don't think people understand how it destroyed the sports industry all around, especially for live events.
Yeah, in 2020, when COVID really hit, we were notified by the governor of the state that that we couldn't run the Kentucky Derby. And as an event that at that point was 146 years old, we didn't want to be the team that let everybody down and broke the streak. So we were negotiated with the state and the governor. And that Derby, the 2020 Derby, we ran with no fans.
Yeah.
And we also we had to run it at a different time of the year. It's always run the first Saturday in May, but that year we had to run it in September because in May there was absolutely no ability to hold a sporting event even without fans. But the way we looked at it at the time, this is an event that survived world wars. It survived another pandemic in 1919. So we never accepted taking a year off. We just found a way to get it done that year. And in a lot of ways, that was a hard derby because it didn't have any of the celebration that really defines the event. But in another way, the team was very proud that we did our part, that we kept the streak going, and that we found a way to get the race in, even if it didn't have the same magic. It had a different magic. The next year, we were allowed to hold it with 50% of the crowd. Mm-hmm. And after that, it's been full speed ahead and big crowds. And this year we're looking tremendous crowds and a tremendous events. Everything that we track, all the metrics that we follow really look exceptional for this Derby. There's a lot of excitement. And I think, if we were England, maybe we wouldn't be so excited about 150 years because that's a much older country. But in the United States, there's really not very much that's 150 years old. I think there's a lot of cachet around that, the fact that this is the oldest continually run sporting event.
Truly crazy when you think of all the things that the Derby has been through, like you were just saying. Wrapping up here, I'd love to, you're talking about people coming back in. You just finished $200 million renovation. Can you tell us about that and what people can expect from the fans who are going to experience that?
Yeah, we just did a transformative project, $200 million to rebuild the paddock of the racetrack. And in a racetrack, the central point, other than the finish line, everybody will go out to the track itself to watch the horses finish. But the central point of the track when the horses aren't on it is the paddock. That's where the horses are paraded before the race for everybody to look at. And that's the heartbeat. That's what everybody in the track looks at and sees and thinks as the center point, the heartbeat of the facility. So we did a transformative project, $200 million, rebuilt the paddock, made it vertical. So it's several layers, several floors, so that more people can see the paddock and the energy is more centered on the paddock. And it affects every person that comes into the facility. And our most distinguished architectural feature of this facility that's been there for 150 years are these things called the twin spires that are on the grandstands, these spires. But you couldn't see them previously because they were behind other buildings. You couldn't get the angle. But now when you walk in our facility, you see this massive brass paddock and you look right at the twin spires and it touches you immediately with the history and the pageantry of the place and just gets you in the mood for a special experience you just can't get anywhere else.
Bill Carstanjen, Chief Executive Officer, Churchill Downs. The Run for the Roses, Saturday, May 4th, for the 150th running of the Kentucky Derby. Bill, thank you so much for joining us, sir.
My pleasure. Happy Derby.
Our thanks to Churchill Downs CEO Bill Carstanjen for joining us. This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports show. We are here each and every week at the same time for my colleagues Scarlett Fu and Damian Sassower, with a special thank you to special guest host Vanessa Perdomo of Bloomberg Originals. I'm Michael Barr. Thanks for joining us. Tune in again next week for the latest on the stories moving big old money in the world of sports. You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world. Stay with us. Today's top stories and global business headlines are coming up right now.